All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. All right. Well, it's good to see everybody here tonight. Pastor texted me this afternoon and said, I'm still not all the way back. He said, so if you don't mind, just why don't you teach everybody together? So that's what we're going to do. And my crew that's in the back, they'll probably drag in a little late. That they like to do that. But tonight we're going to be talking about our kingdom purpose. So we're going to get started on that. We're going to talk a little bit. That's what we've been discussing in the back. We've been talking about finding your spiritual gifts, your heart. What are those things that God, the passions that He ignites in you? What are your abilities? You know, some of us can sing, some of us can't. Some of us can teach, some of us can't. You know, so it's like, what are your abilities? What's your personality? You know, how did God wire you to process things, and how does that indicate what God has called you to do in your life? And then what are your experiences? You know, the things that we go through create in us, all those things together create a unique set of skills and abilities and things that help us to do what God created us to do. So tonight we're going to bring it all together a little bit and talk about how do we start to live what we're going to call our kingdom purpose. So I'm going to start with a quote here from Denny Balesi. It says, God can do amazing things with us when we desire to say yes to Him. So it all starts with that, you know. God created us all for a purpose. Even people who aren't serving Him. You know, people who are running the other way, you know, they're running from the call on their life. God designed them for a purpose. The sad part is that if they don't ever turn around and change course, they're never going to live into that purpose that God designed and created for them. Then there's other people who, you know, they say they serve God, but because of one thing or another, they never get to a place where they activate their faith and they use the spiritual gifts that they've been given. You know, I've given this example before. You know, I used to play a lot of different instruments. That was an ability I had, but I quit playing because I was no longer in band, and I didn't have a band director telling me I had to practice, and I didn't have to learn new songs. And so here I am years later, and if you asked me to pick up one of those instruments and play them, I couldn't. I didn't use the ability, and so I lost the ability. And it's the same way, you know, God will give us gifts and talents and things that we can use for His glory, but we have to make sure that we're using them, or else we'll lose them. So the first thing we have to realize is that you were made to make a significant difference in the world. Sometimes we feel like we don't matter. We feel like, well, you know, if I don't go, if I don't show up this week, nobody will even notice. I'm not that important, you know. And we begin to feel like we're not making a contribution. But the thing is, God made each of us for something. And when we do it, when we live into that purpose, we can feel like we feel alive. We feel like, okay, this was what I was destined to do. There was a movie that came out in 1981, so it's even older than I am, but it's called Chariots of Fire, and it talks about Eric Liddell. He was a British runner, and if you've seen the movie, it's a great movie, but he was a Christian and faced a lot of adversity, but he knew that was what he was called to do. He knew he was called to run. And there's this famous phrase that he says, and they show it during the climax of the movie when he's running in the Olympics. He says, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure. And, you know, really, that there's some good theology in that statement. And we can kind of take that same statement, and we can turn it and create a statement like that for us that helps us identify our purpose in life. So think about it. You might say, God made me blank, and when I blank, I feel His pleasure. Right? Think about it in your own context. Now, we can't all be beautiful, so don't all say, God made me beautiful, and when I look in the mirror, I feel His pleasure, right? Let's not do that. That's a little bit of pride. That's a little hubris. But maybe so. I don't know. Maybe you're supposed to be a runway model. But either way, God made you to do something. And so if we stop and think about it for just a minute, what are those things that God put in you? What are the ways that He shaped you and made you? And then if He made you in a particular way, then if you're not operating in those abilities and in those gifts, you're not living to the fullness of His purpose for you. And you might not even think really that some of these things would glorify God. I mean, I can think of some people who it's like, their gift is they're just mathematical geniuses. You spit out any numbers at them and they can rattle off the answer just like that. And you might say, well, how does that glorify God? I'm not sure. But they can say, God made me talented at mathematics, and when I use that ability to balance the books or, talk finance or coach people in their, whatever, they can take each of these things that God made us to be, and we can live into his purpose with those. Psalm 119, verses 31 and 32 says this, I hold fast to your statutes, O Lord. Do not let me be put to shame. I run in the path of your commands, for you have set my heart free. And I like this phrase, I hold fast to your statutes. Do not let me be put to shame. And you think about it, it is shameful when we waste things, right? Anybody here, when you were younger, if you didn't finish your plate, your mom or your dad would say, you better finish that food because there's people who don't have it, and you better appreciate that it was put on the plate in front of you. And they use that shame to help us realize that, hey, we need to be good stewards. We need to not take more onto our plate than we need. We need to not be wasteful. It teaches us a principle based off of this concept of shame. Well, what would make the psalmist here ashamed? And it would be if he doesn't live up to the purposes that he made him for. He says, I run in the path of your commands, but for you have set my heart free. So it's like, you've made me free. You've given me this ability to follow you. And if I don't do that, then I should be ashamed of myself because I'm not living to the fullness of who you designed me to be. So if we are going to learn how to live into our kingdom purpose, there's a few steps that we need to go through. Number one is we got to get with God. Right? The first thing you got to do is you got to have that relationship with him. You got to have intimacy with him. God is the one who reveals knowledge to us. He reveals ourself to us. He shows you who you are and who he designed you to be. And so when you get with God, he gives you self-knowledge so that you know, okay, I mean, there are some people who can't sing and they don't know they can't sing, right? But most of us know whether you can sing or not. Most of us know whether we're extroverted or introverted. We learn these things about ourselves. God reveals these things to us. And there should be no judgment on yourself for any of these things. Maybe you're one of those people who can't do math. You just can't do it at all. Well, that's okay because God obviously designed you in your mind to work in a different way. They say there are people who have analytical minds. They know the facts and the figures and the rationale behind everything. And then there's the creative people, the imaginative people. One's not better than the other. We need both in this world. So there's nothing wrong with being made in one form or another. We just have to find what that is. And then also, once we know who we are, we also have to get with God to make sure we're on board with what he's doing, right? Because if we decide, well, I want to go do X, but God is doing Y, well, we need to stop doing X and start chasing Y because we're not going to have any success unless we're doing what God's doing. And if we're trying to do X and God's doing Y, we're doing it under our own power and we're not going to succeed. I mean, that's just the way it works. So we have to get with God. And I've got a couple scriptures here. John 15:5 says this, just Jesus speaking. He says, I am the vine and you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. I like this phrase because, if you think about this analogy of a vine and branches, what's the purpose of the vine? The vine is the ground. It's the source. Where does the plant get its nutrients from? From the vine. The vine has the roots down in the soil. The root, it takes the ingredients of the soil and turns it into something that the plant can use. It fuels the plant, and it provides life for the plant, for the vine. And then it's the branches of the vine, though, that using those nutrients, using those resources that come from the vine, it takes that and it produces fruit in the world that can be used and enjoyed. And so we have to make sure that we're plugged into the vine. That's what I mean by saying we need to get with God. We need to make sure that we're drawing on his resources because he'll give us the ability to produce the fruit that is needed in this world. we need fruit in this world. We need production. We need things that edify people and build people up. And that's only produced when we're plugged into the vine. And then I also note that Jesus says here, apart from me, you can do nothing. So it's not like, well, you can do a little bit, but if you got God, then it's supercharged. That's not it. A vine that's cut off, it can't do anything. It can't produce anything if it's cut off from the resources. And so when we're cut off from God, when we're cut off from Jesus, our source, we can't do anything in this world that produces any kind of lasting effect. So if we want to make an impact, and I don't know about you, but when I get to the end of my life, I want to have made a difference in the world. So that's why we got to make sure we stay plugged in. And we do that in a lot of ways. We do that through praise and worship, through prayer, through reading our word, through joining together with a community where we build each other up. All of these things help us to stay plugged into our Maker. And as we do that, then we have the resources to be fruitful in life. 2 Corinthians 3, verses 4 and 5 says this, "We are confident of all of this because of our great trust in God through Christ. It is not that we think we can do anything of lasting value by ourselves. Our only power and success come from God." So this is basically the same thing that Jesus said there. We can't do anything of lasting value apart from God. And our only power, not some of our power, comes from God. Our only power and our only success comes from God our Father. So we have to learn to not try and do things our own way, but we have to practice, discipline ourselves to be obedient to what God is doing. Learn to hear His voice. Learn to follow those nudges and those promptings from the Spirit. That's hard to do because we get caught up in the distractions, right? It's so easy to do. I'm really guilty of this because I love to have music playing all the time. And so a lot of times it's like I've got that going in the background and I can hear the music and I'm not really focused on what I'm doing. And so sometimes God might be trying to speak to me, but I can't hear Him because I'm so caught up in whatever I'm doing. And so we have to make sure that we're not living a life of distraction. And distraction is everywhere nowadays. I read an article not too long ago talking about how kids are suffering. They don't have as much or as powerful of imagination as they used to have because they're never bored. There's always some kind of distraction. There's always some kind of program or lights or video or there's always something going on. And because they're never bored, their mind never learns to occupy itself. It always just consumes whatever's being fed into it. And our society, our children are going to be the poorer for it. And so we have to learn to, in the same way, not to constantly distract ourselves because sometimes we need our minds to wander. Sometimes we need to let God have some space so that He can speak into us. I love to walk. I walk over here in the park just about every night, and most nights I have a podcast in, or I've got some music playing, or something, just to keep my mind occupied while all I'm doing, literally, I'm just walking in circles, So it's like, well, I might as well be doing something productive with that time. But there are times when I feel God tell me, leave the headphones at home tonight, and so I take that opportunity to just walk. Focus and say, okay, God, is there something you need me to listen, to stop and listen to you about? Is there something that you're trying to speak into me? Is there a person that you need me to call and to reach out to? Is there a change in tact or a change in trajectory that you need me to take? But if we're constantly distracting ourselves with Netflix and the news and whatever else it is that we can think of, scrolling on our phones and social media, we can fill up all of our time and never leave space for God to speak into us. But a strong connection with God is essential if we are to experience everything He has in store for us. That is why we must work so hard to remove the distractions that keep us from focusing on God. And some of the distractions are good distractions, right? There's nothing saying that you can't use social media. I love the fact that social media allows me to stay in touch with a lot of friends that live very far from me, and I would not get to spend time with them, and I couldn't stay caught up on their lives and what's happening with their kids, and are they sick and need prayer? That's one of the hard things as a pastor. Sometimes I don't even know when people in the church are sick, but I'll see they post it on Facebook, so at least I know then, okay, I need to pray for that individual. Maybe they need something. People don't want to. It's strange. they don't want to call you and let you know, they'll just blast it out there and hope you see it, So it's just interesting, So I'm not saying there's anything necessarily bad about it, but we just have to make sure that we're not so distracted that we can't hear from God. We have to eliminate distractions and not get so caught up and so fast. Sometimes we need to slow it down. I know I talked in our class a little bit a few months back about the 3 mile an hour God, because most humans, if you're walking at a normal pace, you walk about 3 miles an hour. And we're used to hopping in the car, and I can be all the way downtown in 15 minutes. But if I were to try to walk that'd take hours to get down there. And we're so used to the quick, the fast. You order your Chick-fil-A, and they've got it hot and ready before you even get down there. We're used to fast. But sometimes we need to slow down and give God space to speak. The second thing we have to do is we have to realize our kingdom dream. We all have a dream inside of us. And sometimes you could specifically say, okay, that's a God thing. That is a God dream because it has to do with the kingdom of God. But guess what? Sometimes we have dreams that they seem like they're not necessarily a spiritual thing, but God puts that desire in your heart for a reason. He puts that desire there, and we sometimes surrender those dreams far too early when it was God who gave us that desire. It was God who put that passion and that emphasis in our mind, and it gripped us and it got in our spirit, and we just couldn't let it go. But then sometimes life gets tough, and then we start thinking, well, I don't know how this would ever happen. I don't have the resources to make this happen, and we begin to give up on that. But Bruce Wilkerson, he said this in a book called The Dream Giver. He said, no matter where I travel in the world, whether among hard-charging Manhattan urbanites or villagers in South Africa, I have yet to find a person who didn't have a dream. They may not be able to describe it. They may have forgotten it. They may no longer believe it's possible, but it's there. And we all have these dreams inside of us. Now, some dreams go away, and they're for a good purpose, because if we went by our dreams when we were 7 years old, we'd all be cowboys and astronauts and princesses, Some dreams are just childish fancies, but some dreams have been put in us for a reason, for a purpose. Ephesians 3:20 says this, God is able to do far more than we would ever dare to ask or even dream, infinitely beyond our highest prayers, desires, thoughts, or hopes. Those dreams that seem out of reach to us, because if we're thinking about it and we think, well, I don't know how to make this dream happen. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. I don't have the freedom to do all of these things. So I have to give up on this dream because I can't make it happen. But the thing is we don't have to make our dreams happen ourselves. When we're obedient, and if it truly is a God dream, if He gives you that dream, He's going to give you the resources and equip you to do it. So, sometimes we get these dreams and they just seem too big. And Jim Collins talks about this in a book called Good to Great. He describes them as BHAGs. I don't know, it's kind of a weird term, but it's kind of caught on in the business world. It means a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it's something that, it's a big dream. You don't know how it's going to work, but I'm not going to give up chasing it. And for some of us, there are things there's some BHAGs, there's some big goals that God has put in your spirit. And even though you don't know the how, and you don't know the why, and you don't know what are the steps to get you there, God put that dream in your spirit for a purpose. And when you have a BHAG, when you have one of those big, hairy, audacious goals like that, you don't need someone to sit down and write out describe it in a 3-page mission statement. It's like when JFK got up and said, no, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. They didn't have to sit down and figure out, what's our goal, what's the purpose of this. No, it was very obvious. This is what we're going to do, and whatever it takes to get there, whatever sacrifices, whatever resources we need to put, whatever technology we need to create, whatever people we need to train, we are going to work together as a nation, come together, and we have this big, hairy goal. And you think about it, you think, well, it really was. It was crazy. I mean, we'd had airplanes for less than 100 years when they made that goal to put a man on the moon, and yet they did it. when someone decides, I'm going to reach, summit Mount Everest, they don't have to sit down and have a mission statement meeting, and they don't have to write out the perfect statement that says exactly what they're going to do. They looked at a mountain and they said, I'm going to climb that thing. I'm going to get to the top. And so it's the same way with us. Sometimes we don't know how. We don't know all the steps. We don't know what are going to be the challenges that we're going to have to overcome along the way. But we have these goals, and God put them in us for a purpose. Jesus said this in Luke chapter 18, verse 27. He said, what is impossible with men is possible with God. And, that's the thing. We always, and it's a good idea to use your reason to think about, okay, what can I do? What kind of resources do I have? What kind of abilities do I have? It's good to consider those things. In fact, Jesus tells you, he says, hey, don't start building a tower before you figure out whether or not you've got the resources to finish it. So it's good to think in those terms, but sometimes God is calling us to do things that are beyond human reason, that are beyond the natural. That's why we have this category called the supernatural. It comes from God, and we can't explain it. We can't explain how you can pray for someone and lay hands on them, and they're supernaturally healed. We can't explain sometimes where resources come from, and we have no idea where it came from. We don't have any idea. It's like when Jesus distributed the fish and the loaves. It was mathematically impossible, and yet it happened. And people were fed, and needs were met, even though they started off with just a little lunchbox. So God can do things that we would think to be impossible. Now, when you're thinking about these big goals, there's one word of caution here. We don't want to necessarily equate big with quantity. That's what the world does. The world says, you're going to have the biggest house. You're going to have the biggest bank account. You're going to have the most lofty title or whatever. The world looks at it in that terms, in terms of quantity. But God defines big in terms of quality. He doesn't care if you are the next big, Jensen Franklin or Stephen Furtick or Mark Batterson or any of these other big people who lead giant ministries and they're bringing thousands of people to Christ. That's not what matters to him. What matters to him is the quality of your faith. Are you living out your life faithfully and in the way that God has called you to do in your context? I'm taking a class right now, and that's one of the things we're talking about is, you would think that after thousands of years of reading the Bible, thousands of years of thinking about God and interacting with God, you would say, well, we've got it all figured out. But the thing is every new generation of Christians has to come to the Bible again and say, okay, how does the Bible apply in my time? Because, the world changes so quickly. Just if I think back, 60 years ago to when my grandparents were young people and in their ministry and the society that they lived in. It was a very different world that they lived in than the world that I occupy. And so the answers that they arrived at, the faithfulness that they observed, what worked in their time doesn't necessarily work in my time, and it doesn't necessarily work today. And the things that work for me won't work for my children and my grandchildren. They'll have to figure things out on their own. And so we have to not be focused on the quantity, we have to focus on the quality. But quality is seen by God in our strong connection with Him, in our deep devotion to His purposes, our relentless faith, and our clear conviction to serve Him in our generation and in our context. If you have those things, if you have a relentless faith, if you are devoted to His purposes, if you are close to Him, there's no way you can fail. And sometimes we feel like a failure because, maybe life didn't turn out the way we anticipated. Things didn't turn out how we wanted it to go. And it's crazy how life works. If you told me when I was a teenager that I would end up living in Louisville, Kentucky, helping pastor a church and be there for over a decade, I would have said, you're crazy, because first of all, why would I move to Kentucky? I'd only driven through it before. But life brought me here. God brought me here. And so it doesn't matter what I thought my life was going to look like. What matters is, am I faithful in the place where God's put me? So when we do that, then we can realize our kingdom dream. The next thing is finding your sweet spot. Last night, there were several people from the church. We all went out to the baseball park. And, we watched the pitcher throw the ball, and the batters were swinging at them, and sometimes they'd swing and miss. Sometimes they'd swing and catch it halfway, and it would go flying off in a crazy direction. At one point, they had to put the game on pause because one of the players, he swung the bat, and the ball ricocheted off the top of the bat and hit the umpire straight in the face. He went down to one knee, and they checked on him, and he was like, I can't go on. He eventually went back to the room. They had to bring in a different umpire to finish the game. So, it's crazy how, where the ball will go when things don't happen right. But when you find that sweet spot, occasionally, every now and then, the batter would connect with that ball, and you could tell by the sound of the ball hitting the bat that was a good hit. You'd hear that crack, and that's because that player found the sweet spot. And they didn't even have to try to murder the ball because they were hitting the ball with the sweet spot. That sweet spot is where it has the maximum impact. I used to play golf a lot with my one of my high school buddies. He was on the golf team, and so he was, he had to practice a lot to stay, stay good at it. And I was just along for the ride because I was with him. I could get in for free, so that's why I would go. I was never very good, but I remember that back in the 90s, there was this craze of having these great big, huge drivers that they would hit the ball with. And the whole idea behind that was because if you have this great big huge head on the end of the club, that means it's going to have a bigger sweet spot, and so it's going to be easier to hit the ball and to do it well. Instead of learning how to swing the club right and do it the right way, we'll just go with a big giant bat or a big giant club that looks like a kid's set. But anyway, you needed to hit that sweet spot. And when you hit that sweet spot, you don't have to try to swing as hard as you can because the club is being used the way it was designed to be used. The ball is being struck the way it's supposed to be struck. It's going to go where it needs to go. That's why people like Barry Bonds and Andre Agassi and Tiger Woods, they can get out there and they can just perform. And if you watch them, it looks like they're not even trying all that hard. They'll drive the ball 300 yards, and it's like they're not even trying. Barry Bonds would just get up there, and it looked like he wasn't even swinging that hard, and he'd knock it out of the park. So when we find that sweet spot, we're able to operate to the best of our ability. It's efficient. It's the way God designed it to work. And so we have to find that sweet spot for us. Romans 12, verses 6 through 8 puts it like this. God has given each of us the ability to do certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, then speak out when you have faith that it is God speaking through you. If your gift is that of serving others, serve them well. If you are a teacher, do a good job teaching. If your gift is to encourage others, then do that. If you have money, share it generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have the gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. So we look at it and we see that there's a lot of different things that have to be done in the church. There's a lot of different things that have to be done in the body of Christ. There's a lot of different things that have to be done in ministry and in outreach to the world. And no one person can do them all. So that's why we need a lot of different people that have different talents and different abilities and different capabilities to make a difference in the world. And so don't feel bad. A lot of times we compare ourselves to others and we say, well, I don't really like my ability. I wish I had their ability. When I was a kid, I used to read comic books a lot, and I always wondered, are there any of the superheroes that were jealous of the other superheroes' powers? It's like, well, I know I'm really fast, but I wish I could fly like him, or I know I can fly, but I wish I was super smart like that one, or and it would be silly though for them to be jealous of the other's power because it's their power, their superpower, their ability. That's what made them who they were, and that's how they were able to make a difference in the world. And so we have to do the same things and not be jealous if the abilities that God gave us are different than the abilities God gave other people. It's just the way it is. And it's okay that we're not all the same. So here's the thing. We have to find our sweet spot. And there's ways we're going to do that, and that'll be the last step. I'll get to it, and I'll share how we do that. But you got to lean into what you're good at. Stop fighting against it. If you're not an athlete, stop signing up for marathons. If you're not good at math, don't try to help your buddy with his taxes. I mean, let's be smart about this. And so sometimes we make life harder for ourselves because we try to do things that God has not given us the ability to do. Right? So God puts people around us. He puts people in our lives, and we have to learn how to lean on them. The next thing we have to do is we have to seek wisdom. Hebrews 3:13 says this, "But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." So why does God give us people to surround us? To encourage us. Because it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how mature you think you are. We all have a day where it was a rough day. And we just need somebody to come alongside us and to put their arm around us and be like, it's okay. I saw a video this week. This mom was telling some of the silly things that her toddler had said this week, and she said that the toddler was sitting there trying to make himself burp. And she said, "Stop that. It's time for bed. You just need to go to sleep." And he said, "Listen, I had a rough day. Just let me burp, Mom." And some days we just need someone to come along and say, it's okay to burp. It's okay to have a rough day. We need that encouragement that'll keep us going on those rough days. Proverbs 27:17 says this, "As iron sharpens iron, a friend sharpens a friend." And so, we need our friends to hold us accountable. We need our friends to call us higher. We need our friends to not say, it's okay to be lazy, it's okay to be a bum, it's okay to not try. We need our friends to inspire us to work harder and to say, hey, let me help you. I talked Sunday about the yoke. We need Jesus to come alongside of us and help us. Sometimes we need our friends to come alongside us and help us. It's kind of interesting when you're a young person and one of your friends moves, nobody hires a mover. Why? Because when you're young, everybody's broke. So when you got to move and you're young, what do? You call up your buddies and you say, hey, I'll buy the pizza if you'll come help me move a couch, right? That's what you do. You have to have those friends. Now, as we get older and our bodies start breaking down, we realize, hey, it's easier just to pay somebody to come do this than for all of us to kill each other, trying to move things up and down the stairs. But we need our friends to come around us and to support us when we go through our tough times. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, the next best thing to being wise oneself is to live in a circle of those who are. And so, I don't know about you, but there are times when I sit there and I think, boy, Jonathan, that was pretty dumb. You shouldn't have done that. Right? I did that last night. I was walking into my bedroom, and rather than flipping the light off because I was getting ready to go to bed, I thought, well, I know everything in this room. I'll just leave the light off. That way I don't have to turn it off when I get under the covers. And as I walked in, what did I do? I cracked my toe on the side of one of the pieces of furniture, and I almost fell to the ground. It hurt so bad. And as I'm sitting there and I'm like, stumbled against the wall, I thought, man, that was really dumb. All you had to do was flip the light switch on for just a second, and you would have avoided all this. So sometimes we're not the brightest people, right? And that's when it's good to have other people around us that say, hey, maybe you should think twice about that. Hey, maybe you shouldn't have said that, and maybe you need to try to fix that. Or, hey, I know you're thinking about doing this, but do you really think that's the best idea for you at this time? It's when we have people around us that are wise and they're also following God and they're also chasing after God's purposes and they're also trying to do the right thing, that helps us to do the right thing as well. Have you ever noticed how easy peer pressure kicks in? And you don't even realize it sometimes, but when you're around people that are doing a certain thing, it's easy to fall right in line and start doing the same thing. So that's why we need to make sure that we're surrounding ourselves with people who are wise and godly and who can give us wisdom. When we seek wisdom and when we find it, we should do everything we have to keep it. And then the last thing we do if we're going to live into God's purposes for us is we've got to take a test drive. Sometimes you think, okay, I feel like God's calling me to do this particular thing. Well, in that case, you need to go try it out, and because sometimes we need a trial period. You wouldn't go and buy a car sight unseen, right? You would want to go inspect it. You want to check it. You want to look under the hood. You want to kick the tires. You want to hop in it and drive around the block a few times. You might want to wait till no one's looking and gun it real good off of a green light. You want to know how the car responds to you. You want to give it a shot. I don't know. They've come out with this new thing called Carvana where you can just order your car over the internet. That's crazy to me, especially if you're buying a used car. If you're going to buy a new one, okay, well, it should be covered under a warranty. But if you're buying a used car, you don't know. Someone could have wrapped that thing around a telephone pole, and they've got it held together with duct tape and spit and good wishes, So we take it on a test drive. We try things out. We do the same thing with employment. We've probably hired 3 or 4 ladies over the course of the years to come work in our daycare, and they come and they work for a week or two, and they're like, yeah, this job ain't for me. I thought I liked kids. I like my kids. I don't like other people's kids, And so they realize this isn't the job for me. And other people, they come in and they're like, well, I've never done it before, but after they do it for a couple of weeks, they're like, man, this is awesome. I love working with the children. So you come in and they always have a probationary period. It's for you as a worker. Is this the kind of job that fulfills you and that you enjoy? And then it's also for the employer. Is this person a good fit for our team? Do they work hard? And so you have what's called a probationary period. And if during that period either the worker or the employer decides this isn't working out, then you can part ways and there's no big deal. This was a trial period anyway. We do the same thing when we're dating someone. You don't just get married right off the bat. No, you date someone. You go out with them. You see how they interact with people. Do they like my family? If they hate your family, you probably shouldn't marry them, And that's probably not going to work real well, unless you hate your family too. I don't know. No judgment there. But anyway, the point is like we try someone on. Are we compatible? Do we like the same things? Or, do we get along with each other? If we get crossways with each other, are we able to, be mature enough to say I'm sorry and to get over it? You learn that process as you date someone, and hopefully you find someone who's compatible with you. So it's the same thing. Sometimes we feel like God's calling us to do something, and He really wasn't. We felt that desire. In years of working with young people, I've seen it over and over and over again where, a young man or a young woman, they get saved and they're excited and they're on fire for God, and they think, okay, now that I'm a Christian, now that I believe, I got to go be a pastor, And for some people, it is. God has called them to do it. For other people, no, they haven't. I know one story of a man who all his life he had been very successful businessman, but life just wasn't working out for him. He came to a church service, and at that service, the pastor gave a gospel message, and so he came down to the altar. He committed his life to Christ, and he met with the pastor afterwards. He said, I want to meet with you this week. So he came into his office, and he said, listen, I feel like, and this guy was a very successful businessman. He was a CEO of a company, and he said, I feel like I need to resign my job as a CEO, and I need to go to seminary and get my minister's degree so that I can, now that I'm going to live my life for Christ, I'm going to live it all the way for Christ. But they realized that, the pastor talked to him and he said, now listen, let's make sure that this is for sure what God is calling you to do, because if it is, I'll support you, I'll help you. But if it's not, then we need to make sure that, what is God calling you to do? And eventually this man realized, just because I've committed my life to Christ doesn't mean that I'm called to ministry. And he realized that he could use his influence in the business community. He could use his ability to set policies to treat his employees more fairly and justly. He could use the finances of the company to support good things and his own personal finances as a CEO. He's getting a pretty good paycheck. He's like, that's a pretty good amount of tithe that I can use to fund missionaries and missions work and church functions. And so he realized that while the desire was good, he needed to be where God called him to be, and where God had called him to be and given him the talents and the abilities to do, it was in the business world, not in the ministry world. So we take things on a test drive. And so it's the same way in the church. You might say, I think I want to be a greeter. And so you sign up and you say, I'm going to work on the greeter team for a couple weeks. But then you about 3 weeks in, you realize, I'm kind of an introvert. I don't really like talking to people. Well, then you probably shouldn't be the one that's trying to welcome everybody in if you're just going to frown at everybody and act like they got the cooties when they want to shake your hand. That's probably not the best fit for you. You got to find something else. Or you might say, you know what? We have a really big need in our children's ministry. I think I'm going to go work in the children's ministry. But if you don't like kids and you can't be patient with them, that's probably not the best fit for you. Or you might decide, I want to be on the praise team. And it's like, okay, you can maybe play or you can maybe sing a little bit, but that's not your talent. That's not your gift. So we can try things out for a couple weeks or a couple months even, and then you can say, this wasn't for me. I used to try to put together rotations of people in our church to help teach some of the children's classes. And some people, they loved it. They were like, man, I love being in the rotation. I love it when it's my week to go in and teach the kids. It's so much fun. And then there were other people that they would sign up and they'd do it for a couple months and then they'd be like, yeah, I think we're going to try something else. And that's okay. You find those fits, because when you find your fit, you'll know it. You'll know it. Bill Hybels says it like this. He says, people who decide to serve in God's mission for as long as He gives them breath, they can almost always point back to a specific serving moment that sealed their commitment. In that moment, they say, I felt the God of heaven and earth use me, and I discovered that there's nothing in the world like that. It beats anything else I've ever experienced. When you are functioning in your gifts and your talents, it's going to feel like you're a fish in water. You take a fish and put them on land, they're going to flop around and not do a whole lot. But you put them in water, what are they going to do? They're going to take off, right? Because that's what they were designed to do. And it's the same way. He continues and says this. He says, whether they taught a child how to pray, they guided someone toward faith, they helped a husband and wife reconcile, they served a meal to a homeless person, or they produced an audio tape or a blog post that puts the Christian message in someone's hand, they knew that their lives would never be the same after that. Has anybody ever had that moment in your life where it was like, God used me? That's pretty cool. God used me to make a difference in someone's life. That's awesome. And if you did it one time and you were like, man, that was so cool, but then you never did it again, well, go back. Try it again. Because if it was that good the first time, if you were functioning in the calling that God had on you the first time, go back and do it again. Because God can use you to make a difference in someone else's life. Last week, I went down to Tennessee with my father for a funeral of a man who had been my pastor when I was a very young man. And I was like Henry's age and younger. But we stayed close with them over the years, and his name was Ken Stevens. And he was a very good, very successful pastor. But there were certain things that a pastor's supposed to do that he wasn't good at. He was a pastor, but he was not a good preacher. And he would tell you to your face. He'd say, I am not a good preacher. His wife was a better preacher than he was. And so, out of the 4 weeks of the month, he might preach one of those. And he'd let her preach a week, and then he'd bring in a guest speaker, and he'd let someone else in, because he knew that wasn't his gift and his talent. Didn't make him a bad pastor, even though pastors, that's kind of like assumed you're going to be able to get up and preach from the pulpit. And he's like, I can preach, and God can use me, but that's not what I'm gifted at. He wasn't good at music. So what did he do? He hired my dad to come in and be his worship leader. And so he knew, I'm called to ministry. I know that I'm called to this, but I'm not necessarily good at everything. And it's the same in our church. There's a lot of things that have to be done to make this church work. But Pastor Rob can't do it at all, and I can't do it all. That's why he gave us a whole bunch of people, and we each are supposed to function in those abilities. So just like Ken Stevens, he was a fantastic pastor. Where he was strong was he was good in administrating. He was good in pastoral care. Man, if you needed something from him, he was going to be there. He would pray for you. He'd speak words of wisdom into your life. He was there for you no matter what. He was just a fantastic care pastor, and administrator. Those were his gifts. So it wasn't necessarily the flashy stuff up on the stage, but man, did he keep that place running right, and man, did he make sure that people were shepherded and taken care of. So just like he didn't have all of the things that needed to be done, God brought people into that church that could pick up the slack where he couldn't. He gave Ken his wife Rita, who she was a firecracker. She could preach the house down, And so together they were able to do that. He gave him staff members that could come and work at the church alongside of him and help him keep the church running. And it's the same way in our church. If we try to say, well, that's not my job, we pay the pastor for that. I'm not trying to point any fingers, but it's like that's not how the body of Christ works, right? Now, again, if we call it a body, and our bodies have a lot of different parts. We got thumbs and fingers and knees and ankles and all of those kinds of things. And they're all designed for a particular purpose. And I can't take my ankle and plug it up on top of my head and expect it to work. So, find your place, find your role, and then do it well. Do it well because God designed you to fill that position. There are people who in this church who are prayer warriors. They can pray the house down. That's a gift. That's a talent from the Lord. There are people who are just so good at being kind and welcoming and make people feel a part of the community. And they serve on our greeter team. And some of them aren't on our greeter team. They're like unofficial greeters because I see them every Sunday afternoon sending messages to people. Hey, I missed you in church this Sunday. I missed your face. We love you. Please let us know if you need anything. So everybody in our church has a design and a purpose. So we got to make sure, take a test drive, try a few things out, and find out what your gift is. So if we will do all of those things, then we can live into our kingdom purpose. There's nothing worse than something to go to waste. I can think of a million things that I've shoved in a closet back at the house, and it's not doing what it was designed to do because I don't use it. I don't have a purpose for it. So rather than giving it to somebody who could use it, what do? I shove it in the closet, and it sits there and gathers dust for years. I've decided I don't want to live like that anymore. So if I've got something I'm not using, I try to find somebody who can use it. I try to give it to somebody, and maybe they want it, maybe they don't. Maybe they're like, oh, great, here comes Jonathan giving me more junk. I don't know. But maybe it could be a blessing to somebody. So we just have to make sure that we're intentional about, we're making sure we're living into the purpose God designed us for. So I want to just open it up for just a few minutes and remind you of that statement at the very beginning where it said, God made me blank, and when I blank, I feel His pleasure. So I know that if there's anybody watching online, they won't be able to hear your responses, but I'm used to being back there, and we all talk and we all interact, so I need you all to interact. Is there anybody who, when I read that statement, you could think of what you would fill that blank in with? Anybody want to share? How did God make you? God made me blank, and when I blank, I feel His pleasure. It could be something that you feel like is silly. It could be, God made me tall, and when I change light bulbs, I feel His pleasure. I don't know, whatever it is.
I feel good visiting.
Okay, visiting. Okay, so God made you hospitable, maybe, or God made you caring or compassionate, and when you visit, then you feel His pleasure. That's a great one. Okay, anybody else? Toot your own horn a little bit. Yeah, Kim.
Mine is greeter.
Greeting?
Last church I greeted, I just feel, man, come over here, and before it's like got into it, and I love it. That's one thing about it. I like greeting people in the front door.
All right, so and that helps you know that you're living into your purpose. God made me friendly, and when I greet people, then I feel His pleasure. Yeah, I thought I saw another hand. Did somebody else raise their hand? Miss Kate?
I like to do things that people just ignore, not do. They're supposed to be done, but nobody will do it. And
Okay.
so when I find it, I don't pass by it, I just do it. And that gives me that joy that I'm serving the Lord by doing what people wouldn't do.
Okay, so in that case, you might say, God made me observant, and so when I pay attention to the small details, I feel God's pleasure. Something like that. So I think we can, all of us, if we take a moment, and it's okay to be a little proud of the way God made you. If He made you smart, be proud of that. He gave you a brain that works better than mine, If He made you charismatic, then be proud of that. He made you pretty, and people like you. Whatever it is, He made you that way for a purpose. So just make sure that you're doing and using those things that God designed you to be. Use them for His glory. I mentioned Sunday about the bishop that was going to be in the debate, and he said, look, even if I lose this debate, God can still be glorified in it. And that's the thing. No matter what you do, if you do it and you dedicate it to Him, then God can be glorified through it. So now, obviously, there are things you're good at, and there are things that you're not good at. God did not give me the spiritual gift of baking, So if I was going to try to be kind to somebody, I would not bake them a cake. That would be an unkind thing to do. Right? But find those things that God gave you, the abilities God gave you. Lean into them and say, God, how can I use this thing that I know how to do, that you gave me the ability to do? How can I use it for your glory? And when we do that, then we don't have to worry about when I get to the end of my life, did I make a difference? Did it matter? Did I make a positive impact on the world and on God's kingdom? One of the things I'm reading about a lot right now is as Pentecostals, there's a heavy focus on God's kingdom because we believe that God is going to come back soon, and that the world is going to be judged, and that His kingdom is going to be finally realized. And we celebrate when miraculous things happen. It's where the kingdom of God that will be fully realized when we go to heaven, it breaks into the here and now. And that's when we see people healed, people saved, lives changed. all of those things. We celebrate those as Pentecostals. That's the kingdom of God that's the thing that is promised to us, and we're getting a little bit and a little taste of it right now. And so we just need to make sure that we are focused on that end goal, and that the things we spend our resources of time, money, attention, all of those things, we have limited resources of all of that. We need to make sure that we're spending them on the things that matter. And I believe, that you all are doing that. I'm speaking to a room full of believers here. You gave up part of your Wednesday night to come and to hear the Word. That tells me that you love God and that you love the Word and that you're investing time into it. But let's make sure that we don't shortchange ourselves and overlook some of the things that we can do just because they're not classically one of the spiritual gifts, right? We think of the spiritual gifts of speaking in tongues and prophecy and all of that. And if we don't see baking a cake on that list, we think that God can't be glorified by that. But He can. It depends on how we do it and if we're doing it for His glory. So, we want to close out tonight with a time for prayer, praise reports, and prayer requests. I used to just say prayer requests in my class, but I had so many people, they would raise their hand and say, well, I got a praise report, though. So we want to hear those, too. So before we close, I just want to open it up for anybody. We'll start with Pastor and my mom. They're both been ill, with sinus infection and all ear infections and that kind of stuff. They're just dealing with a lot of that kind of stuff right now. I keep offering to bring them stuff, and they're like, nope, stay away. We don't want to infect you too. But let's pray for them that they'll be on the mend and be able to rejoin us again. Does anybody else have any prayer requests? Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for praying for me.
Okay.
His operation.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear that, G. Paul had his operation. He wanted to thank us all for praying for him. And we're so glad to see you back out. He told me before service this is the first time he's ventured out. I said, you picked the right place to come. So, all right, any other prayer requests before we close?
That my interview goes well tomorrow.
Okay, we got a job interview tomorrow. All right, well, yeah, we will definitely pray for that. We'll pray for God's favor, and if it's His desire for you to have that job, that you get it, and if it's not, send something better along, right? Okay. Anything else before we close? All right, let's pray. Father God, we just thank you so much for this ability and this time to come together and to study your word. Lord, we thank